Please welcome to the stage Mr. Vache Kahramanian to deliver the advocacy address.
I remember and I demand. 5 simple words that have come to embody the unity of the Armenian nation and the Armenian people who gather on this most solemn day of remembrance, the centenary of the Armenian Genocide. It is always difficult to find the words and the emotive courage to pen such an address. This year made all the more difficult with the gravity of why we have gathered here this evening. As I arrived at Sydney Town Hall earlier today, I took a moment to pause outside the steps of this grand and majestic building and to consider the significance of why we are gathered in this hall tonight. It was in January of 1920 that a few Armenian orphans, the fortunate ones who survived the Armenian Genocide and who were able to find a safe haven here in Australia, stood on the very same steps that we entered from this evening to raise awareness of the plight of those starving, destitute survivors, boys and girls that lay orphaned, forgotten, with little to no hope of salvation. It was in this exact same hall that the premiere screening of Aurora Magardician's Ravished Armenia, also known as The Auction of Souls, a film recounting the horrors of the Armenian Genocide, premiered in Australia, and due to its popularity, was screened for 2 consecutive weeks. It was in this very building that the first meeting of the Armenian Relief Fund of Australia was held to coordinate relief efforts to help starving and destitute survivors of this greatest crime against humanity. 100 years on, we gather in this very same town hall to pay our respects and homage to the 1.5 million victims of this unspeakable horror. I remember and I demand. Ralph Emerson once said, "We are of different opinions at different hours, but we may always be said to be at heart on the side of the truth." Tonight, this commemoration is testament to the words of Emerson that the truth will always be victorious. 2015 has seen an unprecedented level of advocacy here in Australia and around the world. Weeks ago, during a mass dedicated to the centenary of the Armenian Genocide in the Armenian Rite at the Vatican, His Holiness Pope Francis stood with the resolve of a true leader and declared that what happened to the Armenians was, and I quote, "the first genocide of the 20th century." In the past few days, we have seen nations, including Austria, Bolivia, Chile, and the Netherlands, stand up to Turkey's ongoing denial of the Armenian Genocide by taking the moral high ground and formally moving motions recognising the historical reality of what occurred between 1915 to 1923. Hours ago, the German president called for the recognition of the Armenian Genocide. And in a matter of hours from now, the Federal Republic of Germany will affirm the historical reality of the Armenian Genocide by passing a motion in the Bundestag with the full support of the German government. In the past 24 hours, we have seen the President of Israel echo the comments of Pope Francis. We have seen leaders of nations, NGOs, and civil society call on Turkey to end its century of denial and to recognise the Armenian Genocide in order to initiate steps towards justice and reconciliation. Yesterday, we saw the leadership of the Australian Jewish community rise up and add its collective voice to the global recognition efforts, calling on Australia and Israel to recognise the Armenian Genocide. International celebrities, including George Clooney, System of a Down, Cher, Kim Kardashian, and along with sports stars from Andre Agassi to Martina Navratilova, have all joined in the call for recognition to ensure that the memory of 1.5 million victims of the Armenian Genocide is never allowed to be forgotten. The presidents of France, Russia, Uruguay, along with an extensive list of high-level representatives from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Switzerland, Lebanon, only to name a few, have arrived in Armenia to pay their nation's respects to the 1.5 million victims of what is now globally known as the Armenian Genocide. It is not surprising, though, that on this very same day, as the international community marks the centenary of the Armenian Genocide, there is another commemorative event taking place. And no, my dates are not being confused with Anzac Day commemorations that will solemnly take place tomorrow on April 25th. The victory of Gallipoli, an event that is commemorated on March 18th of each year in Turkey, was conveniently moved to April 24th this year by the Turkish state to coincide with the centenary of the Armenian Genocide, for no other reason to deflect Turkey's ongoing guilt in this unpunished crime. In the coming hours, as world leaders begin the solemn procession to Dzizernagapert, the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Yerevan, the representative of one country will be noticeably absent. Weeks ago, we were informed that the Australian Prime Minister had declined the invitation of the President of the Republic of Armenia to attend the centenary commemoration in Yerevan. This was not unexpected, as the Prime Minister had already announced his travel schedule to be in Gallipoli for the centenary of Anzac Day. However, the sequence of conversations that followed thereafter were not only disappointing, but also insulting. The Australian government did not see fit, but more correctly, I assume, was not allowed to send a representative to Armenia under Ankara's ongoing gag orders. It was only last year when, under a Freedom of Information request, we became aware of Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop's letter addressed to her then Turkish counterpart, outlining Australia's strategic interests with Turkey as a reason not to acknowledge the events of 1915 to 1923 as genocide. It is truly saddening that a representative of a country who was one of the first to provide aid to victims and survivors of the genocide, a country that has long championed human rights around the world, will not be in Yerevan as a result of Turkey's ongoing pressure. It is in times like these that world leaders can be reduced to insignificance at their own doing due to their lack of moral courage. However, there have been huge strides made here in Australia on genocide recognition. We all know the steadfast support by the New South Wales and South Australian parliaments. And it was only weeks ago that the Treasurer of Australia, Joe Hockey, joined with many other members of the federal parliament, entering question time wearing the forget-me-not pins that we're all wearing this evening, as a testament to their continued efforts in advocating for genocide recognition. We have seen members of the Australian government break ranks to publicly advocate for the recognition of the Armenian Genocide by the Parliament of Australia. This is no longer the exception, but the norm. And from today, let us collectively work to ensure that the Commonwealth Parliament of Australia adds its voice in the recognition of the Armenian Genocide. Since the beginning of 2015, we have seen an unprecedented level of media coverage across all the major Australian print, radio and television outlets on the Armenian Genocide, with one notable change: a drop in the use of pretexts and qualifiers to describe what happened in 1915. This in itself has been a huge feat in raising further awareness amongst the wider Australian public. The 20th century has seen some of the darkest chapters etched into the pages of history. 100 years on, 1.5 million innocent victims of this unspeakable crime still do not rest in peace. We still have a long path ahead of us. As the sun rises the day after April 24th, and after the bugles fall silent at Anzac Cove, let us collectively continue our resolve to bring justice and closure to 1.5 million people who were so brutally silenced in an attempt to rid the world of the Armenian people. 76 years after Hitler declared, "Who after all speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians," today I am proud to declare from this stage that I do, we all do. Too often we hear that too long has passed, that after a century, Armenian communities worldwide should forget their demand for justice and that we should reconcile. Forget our grandparents and great-grandparents, their brothers and their sisters. Forget those whom we have known and those who we did not have the opportunity to know. We should forget the evils bestowed upon our people and that we should forgive. Forgive those who do not seek forgiveness. Forgiveness can only begin with recognition and justice. I remember and I demand, lest we forget.